Shoulders back and down. Squeeze them back. Come on. Shoulders back and down. Shoulders back and down. Shoulders back and down. There we go. Shoulders back and down.
Don't forget to sleep with your shoulders back and down.
Okay, babe.
Unfortunately, this cue is so overused and overrated and misunderstood in its application. And I want to help you understand why that is and what you can do instead to improve your posture and your movement. Now, there are a lot of reasons why I have a problem with the idea of shoulders back and down, many of which I discussed as they relate to standing in a separate video, which I will link. But I do want to address some other things that this can be problematic with. Let's think about this in the context of lifting weights, especially as it relates to what we most commonly see this cue used for, which is presses, whether that's a barbell bench press or dumbbells or anything where you're really targeting the pecs. You see this used a lot. Big problem is that what is the goal of using a press? It's to, as I mentioned, target the pecs. Well, what do the pecs do? They create internal rotation and adduction of your humerus, meaning that it's going to bring the humerus closer to the midline of the body and rotate this bone in. What that requires and necessitates of the rib cage and the scapula is for it to change shape a little bit. So as I bring my arm across my body, my scapula needs to be able to move into what we call internal rotation, but most importantly, protraction. So it's going to elevate a little bit and it's going to wrap around the rib cage as my arm moves closer to the midline of my body. How is this going to happen and how are we going to fully leverage the pecs effectively if our shoulders are being squeezed back and down, like many people do, pretty hard? They're not. Now, I'm not suggesting people round their shoulders forward as they move into a press. I think that there's a happy medium ground that we can find here. What I usually cue on a press is for you to keep contact and feel the space between the scapula and the spine. This space right in here should be able to be felt firmly on that bench. And if you can do that while keeping your chest proud, you're going to allow your scaps to move and you're going to allow your pecs to work better. It's possible to keep your sternum up and not squeeze your shoulders back. That's the biggest difference here, because a lot of people think that they need to be taller and they need to go here. No, just keep your eyes level, and if there was a laser pointer coming out of your sternum, keep it pointing straight ahead. That's the better cue that I like to use for a lot of people, whether it's for posture or movement. Now let's talk about rows. And some may be thinking, well, Connor, isn't it ideal if I squeeze my shoulders back on a row, because that is what we're trying to accomplish in the row, is that scapular retracted, adducted position. Okay, well, let's think about what muscles we're trying to target in a row. We're trying to target the big muscles of the upper back that help control the rotation of the scapula. Muscles like the rhomboids that help pull the scapula closer to the spine. Sure, I agree. However, if we're starting this row already with our shoulders back and then just moving through this movement right here, all we're doing is we're pulling this scapula into an already in range position of that row, and now we're just pulling the humerus into extension, so you're not getting any of that coupled movement. How are we going to use these big muscles that help primarily control the rotation of the scapula relative to the humerus if the scapula isn't able to rotate? This is why I think a better cue for rows is to let yourself get a little tiny bit of protraction at the end range of the eccentric phase of the movement, and then lead with the elbow, and your scapula will naturally follow. You don't really have to cue your scaps to do much. If the elbow is doing the work, then your humerus is going to be able to move into extension, and your scapula will naturally follow it down into the position you want it to go in. Getting the scapula to work well with the humerus and the rib cage is a massively foundational aspect of my beginner body restoration program. So if you want exercises that will set you up for success, then you can check that program out. I will link it down below. Now let's talk about a lower body movement, like the barbell back squat. When we have a bar resting on our back and we're squeezing our shoulders back so that way we can get that little shelf to rest the bar on, right? And as we go down into that squat, that should allow us to maintain that bar in a nice, safe position. What is a squat? Well, a squat is vertical movement of the pelvis. It's not a hinge. A hinge is butt back, a squat is butt down. So as I move deeper and deeper into hip flexion, I should be able to keep a relatively neutral or parallel position of my pelvis relative to the ground. If we're seeing all this stuff happen, then it's probably not a great squat. So what we're gonna do when we squeeze our shoulders back and down for that rack position is we're going to end up flaring our ribs and pushing our pelvis forward into this anterior pelvic tilt. Now, as I go down into that squat, I now have to still push my butt straight down relative to where it's starting. Well, my new straight down is to go like this and forward fold. Now my squat depth sucks, and now I'm going to be using my low back a lot because it's in a very compressed position. But if our goal is to squat well and limit overuse and wear and tear of places we don't really want it to over time, then we want a more vertical squat relative to what our body is capable of doing. If we're gonna do a back squat, what most people don't realize, especially for a high bar back squat, we don't need to squeeze our shoulders down and back in order to create a shelf for the bar to sit. We already have a natural one, and by getting a proper grip, which is slightly outside of shoulder width, and Trevor gets under that bar there, we have something in our scapula called the uppermost ridge, which is the spine of the scap. And if you get under the bar there and you find that spine of the scap, you can naturally rest the bar there without needing to create excessive posterior compression like that, which is just gonna push your pelvis forward. So notice how Trevor is gonna find that area. He unracks the bar, and if he goes into that normal stance, so take a couple steps back there we go. Now, Trevor can still get a stacked rib cage over his pelvis, and if you squeeze your shoulders down and back, you see how that's gonna push his pelvis forward, but without that, he can still keep this stacked and now go down into that squat for me, Trevor, and he can stay much more aligned. Now let's do it the traditional way. So if Trevor squeezes his shoulders down and back and then he unracks the bar, you can see that he's got a good bit of extension here, ribs are flared. Now if he goes down, his squat's going to be a little bit more limited in the range of motion, and it's not going to feel as good. And over time, this can put a lot of wear and tear on our low backs. The point is, free your scaps. Let them move, let them roam. It's so important that we allow our scapula to be able to work with our humerus. And I bet you many people's shoulders and overall bodies would feel better if they did.